The last thing Frank said before the surgery doors closed was not, "I love you." He had said that to me every morning for 37 years, so perhaps he thought I already knew. What he said instead, his hand squeezing mine so tightly I still felt it an hour later, was, "Whatever happens, let Colette explain." I have been trying to understand those 4 words ever since. My name is Adele Pearson. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a librarian at a school in Hamilton, Ontario, and I thought I knew how to be patient. I thought I understood that some stories take time to reveal themselves. But nothing in all those years of cataloging books and shelving other people's quiet truths prepared me for what I found inside that wooden box in my husband's study 3 days after his surgery. Frank and I met in 1987 at a community dinner in our neighborhood. He was quiet and steady, the kind of man who fixed things before you noticed they were broken. He worked for the same electrical contracting company in Hamilton for 34 years. We bought our house on Holton Avenue in 1991. We planted a maple tree in the backyard that is now taller than the roofline. We raised our daughter Petra, put her through university in Kingston, and watched her get married last autumn in a small ceremony in Niagara-on-the-Lake. We were not wealthy. We were not exciting. We were, by most definitions, exactly the kind of boring couple that lasts. There was only one shadow: Frank's younger sister, Colette. Colette Pearson was 5 years younger than Frank, which made her 54 when all of this happened. She had never settled into anything for very long. Not jobs, not cities, not relationships. Every Christmas she had a new plan. Every Thanksgiving she arrived with a different story about why the last plan had not worked out. She was warm and funny in small doses, the sort of person who could make a room laugh without trying. But she could also make a room tense without trying, and she did that more often. Over the years, she had borrowed money from Frank more times than I could count. He always lent it without complaint. "She'll figure things out," he used to tell me. "She just needs time." I stopped arguing about it sometime around our 20th anniversary. Some conversations simply have no resolution. The morning Frank collapsed was an ordinary Tuesday in February. He had gone out to clear the front walk after an overnight snowfall, a habit he had kept for 30 years, despite everything I said about his back. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal when I heard the shovel stop. It was the silence that told me something was wrong before anything else did. The paramedics were at our door within 9 minutes. "Cardiac event," they said. "Possibly a blockage." They needed to get him to Hamilton General quickly. I grabbed my coat. I did not grab my purse. I stood on the front step in my slippers and watched the ambulance leave, and could not remember for a moment what I was supposed to do next. Colette arrived at the hospital before I did. I found her in the waiting room already, coat still on, coffee cup in her hand, face the color of the winter sky outside. I had not called her. She stood when she saw me. She reached for my arm. I let her hold it. That surprised me. The surgeon told us the procedure had gone well. Frank would need several days in hospital, then weeks of rest at home. He was out of immediate danger. When I finally saw him in recovery, he could barely keep his eyes open. He squeezed my hand and said something I could not fully hear. I leaned closer. "Let Colette explain." Then he was asleep. I went home that evening to find the house so quiet I could hear the kitchen clock. The insurance documents I needed were in Frank's study. He had always handled our paperwork, not because I couldn't, but because he liked order, and I was happy to let him have it. His study was exactly as he had left it. Files in labeled folders, pens lined up beside the desk lamp, a coffee mug from the previous morning still sitting on a coaster. It smelled like him, pine and something warm underneath. The insurance folder was not where I expected it. I checked the top drawer, the filing cabinet, the shelf behind the desks. That was when I noticed the wooden box. It had always been on that shelf. Frank had brought it from his parents' house after his father died. Dark walnut, a small brass latch, no larger than a shoebox. I had assumed for years that it held personal things. Old letters, photographs, things a man keeps from his childhood. I had never thought to open it. It was not mine to open. Except that the latch was not fully closed. I stood in front of that shelf for a long moment. Frank had asked me to let Colette explain. He had not asked me to wait. He had not said, "Stay out of the study, trust me without question." He had said, Let Colette explain. Which meant there was something to explain. I opened the box. Inside, neatly arranged in the way Frank arranged everything, were 2 items: a stack of folded papers, and a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in his handwriting. Just Adele. No last name. The envelope looked as though it had been there for a long time. I picked up the papers first. They were bank transfer records. I recognized our account number at the top. The transfers were dated going back 18 years. Sometimes 2 in a single month. Sometimes 1 every few months, but never stopping. Each one listed the same recipient. C. Moreau, Colette's maiden name. Amounts ranging from $800 to $3,000. I stood at that desk and counted the transfers without sitting down because my legs did not seem to understand yet what my eyes were reading. 18 years. Dozens of transfers, thousands and thousands of dollars. I remember every conversation Frank and I had ever had about money. The year we could not afford new windows. The summer we patched the driveway instead of replacing it. The trip to Prince Edward Island we postponed twice. He had never once mentioned these transfers, not a single time. I sat down. The envelope was sealed with tape, not glue. The way you seal something you might one day need to open without tearing. I peeled it open carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter on 3 sheets of paper. Frank's handwriting, careful and slightly cramped, the way it always was. Adele, it began. If you are reading this without me beside you, then something has happened that I was not quick enough to prevent. I am sorry. I want you to know that nothing in these pages changes what our life together has meant to me. But I owe you the truth I have been too frightened to give you. I stopped. Read that again. Too frightened. Frank had never seemed frightened of anything I could see. I continued. There is a debt I have been carrying for 18 years. Not a financial debt, though it has had a financial cost. A moral one. I have managed it the only way I knew how. Quietly, consistently, and with the help of someone who has shared this weight with me from the beginning. I turned to the second page. I know what you are thinking. You are thinking that the person who shared this weight was Colette. You would be right. But I need you to understand something before you decide what to feel about that. Colette did not ask me for this. She did not manipulate me. She has been carrying something much heavier than money, and she has done it alone because I asked her to. There was one more paragraph on the second sheet, and then the letter stopped mid-sentence on the third page. The person who should be at the center of this story is not me and not Colette. His name is... Nothing. The sentence ended there. The rest of the page was blank. I turned the sheet over. I checked the envelope again. There was no 4th page. Someone had removed it. I sat at Frank's desk for a long time after that. The winter light through the window turned from gray to dark while I sat there. I thought about Colette at the hospital, how quickly she had arrived, how she had reached for my arm. I thought about the word Frank had used, frightened. The next morning, I went to the hospital early. Frank was awake but exhausted. He looked at me, and I could see him searching my face, trying to read what I knew. I kept my expression quiet. We talked about the doctor's visit. We talked about Petra, who was driving up from Kingston that afternoon. We talked about the maple tree. Then I asked, very calmly, when Colette had last borrowed money from him. The silence that followed was not long, but it was full. He said, "It's not what you think." I said, "Then tell me what it is." He looked at the ceiling. His voice was low. "I can't yet, Adele, not here, not like this." I told him I had found the box. I told him I had found the letter. I told him I had found where the letter ended. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, there were tears. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought I'd have time to tell you properly." I did not push him further. His blood pressure monitor was already showing numbers that made me nervous. But when Colette arrived that afternoon, I followed her into the hallway. I asked her directly, what did she know about the missing page? She went very still. She was holding a paper bag, a bagel for Frank, I think. She lowered it slowly. "I took it," she said. I stared at her. "I took it," she repeated, "because I wanted to be the one to tell you. Not a piece of paper, me." She looked so tired, not guilty. Tired, not like someone caught in a lie. tired the way a person looks when they have been holding something heavy for a very long time and their arms have simply given out. I said, "Then tell me now." She shook her head. "Not today." I almost walked away. Instead, I asked her one question. Did she keep any of the money Frank had sent her? She looked at me for a long moment. "No," she said, "not 1 cent." I did not believe her. I wanted to. I could not. 2 days later, I found a business card tucked beneath the stack of bank records in the box. Small, slightly bent, the logo a simple silhouette of a wooden chair. A. Forest Fine Woodworking, Kingston, on. A phone number, nothing else. I also found, tucked beneath the papers, a photograph I had not noticed before. Frank, Colette, and a young man I did not recognize, his arm in a sling, standing in what looked like a hospital corridor. His face was turned toward the camera. Despite everything about that picture, he was smiling. On the back, in careful young handwriting, "Thank you. AF. A date, 18 years ago." I called the number on the card. The voice that answered was calm and unhurried. I told him my name. I told him my husband was Frank Pearson. A pause, short but careful. Then, "I've been wondering if this call might come one day. Would you be willing to meet?" We met at a small cafe in Kingston on a Thursday morning in late February. He was in his mid-30s. Younger than I had imagined, though the photograph had been taken when he was barely more than a teenager. He walked with a slight favoring of his left side and used a wooden cane he had made himself. He told me later, he had kind eyes and the particular steadiness of someone who has rebuilt something from the ground up. He told me everything. 18 years ago, Colette had borrowed Frank's car to drive to Hamilton from Toronto. It was January. Ice on the roads, visibility poor. She had not told Frank she was taking the car until after the fact. On the highway outside the city, she lost control on a patch of black ice. Her car struck Alec Forrest, who was standing at the edge of the road after his own vehicle had stalled. A young man, 22 years old, working 2 jobs to save money for a welding certificate. He spent 4 months in hospital. His right leg required 3 surgeries. He lost his job, his apartment, and the better part of a year of his life. Colette had panicked. She had called Frank before she called anyone else. Frank arrived at the scene. He stayed. He spoke to the police. He contacted Alec's family. He arranged a private settlement because Alec did not want a court case. He wanted his medical bills paid and some certainty that he could rebuild. Frank had provided that certainty, month after month, for 18 years. He had helped pay for Alec's physiotherapy, his retraining, eventually the equipment for his woodworking shop. He had done it without ever presenting it as charity. He had done it because he told Alec when they first met, someone ought to make this right. Alec told me that Frank had visited him 4 times in those first 2 years, that they had corresponded by letter after that, that Frank had never asked for gratitude or acknowledgement, that the last letter Frank had written him was 2 Christmases ago, asking about the shop, about his apprentices, about whether he had taken on the restoration contract he had mentioned. I asked Alec if he had forgiven Colette. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I stopped being angry a long time ago. What happened that night was an accident. What happened after, the leaving, the silence, that was harder. But your husband staying changed things. It's hard to stay angry at a family when one of them refuses to let you disappear." I drove home in the early evening, with the sun low and orange over the highway. I thought about Frank, about the postponed trips, and the tight budgets and all the conversations in which I had agreed to wait a little longer. I had trusted his judgment about every one of those decisions. I had not known what I was trusting him to carry. That Thursday evening, Colette came to the house. I had called and asked her to come. She stood on the front porch with her coat buttoned to the collar, and I could see on her face that she expected me to be angry. I probably should have been. I had every right to be. Instead, I told her to come inside. We sat at the kitchen table. She gave me the missing page of Frank's letter. She had been carrying it inside her coat pocket since the day she took it. She had not been able to throw it away. The last page read, "The person who has shared this weight with me is Colette. She did not cause the accident, the road and the winter did. But she drove that night, and she has lived with that knowledge every day since. I stayed silent because I was trying to protect her." I now understand that protecting someone from the truth is not the same as protecting them. I hope you will find a way to understand why I believed it was, for a time, and I hope you will give her what I could not. The chance to earn your forgiveness without having to ask for it directly. She is not the person you have spent 30 years believing she was. She has been becoming someone else, quietly, for 18 years. I have been watching. Frank! I read it twice. Colette watched me read it without saying a word. Finally, I asked her why she had never told me herself. She said, "Because Frank asked me not to. And because I was a coward. And because every time I thought about sitting across from you and saying what I needed to say, I convinced myself you would hate me more for saying it than for staying quiet." I told her I was not sure she was wrong. She nodded. She did not argue. We sat there for a while in the kitchen, 2 women in their 60s, a pot of tea going cold between us, winter pressing against the windows. It was not a comfortable silence, but it was an honest one, and that was more than we had ever managed before. Frank came home 3 weeks later. He moved slowly and tired quickly, and complained about everything the doctors told him not to eat. On his first morning back, I made him oatmeal with blueberries, because the cardiologist said he needed fiber, and he ate it without complaining, which told me more about how frightened he had been than any conversation could. That afternoon, I brought the wooden box to the kitchen table while he was resting in his chair. I set it in front of him. He looked at it for a long time. I told him I was not angry. That was true, and also not completely true, and I told him both things. I told him I wished he had trusted me to carry it with him. He said he had not wanted me to look at Colette the way I had always looked at her, and have a real reason. He had thought protecting our peace was worth the cost of the secret. He understood now that it was not his choice to make. I said, "It never was." He said, "No, it wasn't." We did not have a dramatic reconciliation. We did not need one. We had 37 years of ordinary life behind us, and those years had weight and texture, and they did not disappear because of a stack of bank transfers in a wooden box. What we had was real. What he had hidden did not erase it. It only added a room I had not known was there. That spring, Colette drove up from Toronto on a Saturday in April. Petra was visiting with her husband. We had lunch on the back porch for the first time since the previous summer. Frank and Petra's husband talked about the maple tree. Colette helped me carry plates inside, and we stood at the kitchen sink together, and she said without looking at me, "I don't expect things to be different overnight." I said, "They won't be." She nodded. I said, "But they can be different eventually. I think that's enough to start with." She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said thank you in a voice so quiet. I almost did not hear it over the water running in the sink. Frank sent Alec Forrest a letter the following month. He told him he was recovering. He asked about the shop. He enclosed a photograph, the 4 of us at the kitchen table, on that Saturday in April, caught mid-law by Petra with her phone. No posed expressions. Just a family, imperfect and intact, gathered around a table in the spring light. Alec wrote back within the week. He said he had put the photograph on the shelf above his workbench. He said that when his apprentices asked who the people in it were, he told them, "People who taught me that the worst day of your life doesn't have to be the last word in your story." I read that letter standing at the kitchen window, with the maple tree budding green outside, and Frank's coffee cup on the counter behind me. And I thought about all the things we keep locked away, in boxes, in silences, in the careful distance between what we know and what we are willing to say. The wooden box is still on the shelf in Frank's study. It holds different things now. The photograph Alex sent back to us, signed on the back in his steady carpenter's hand. A card Petra made for her father when she was 7, which I found in the attic and he could not bear to throw away. A letter I wrote to Frank the week he came home from the hospital, not asking for explanations, only telling him that I was glad he was still here to give them. The latch is never fully closed anymore. I used to think that trust meant knowing everything. I used to believe that a marriage without secrets was a marriage without shadows. I understand something different now. Trust is not the absence of shadow. It is the willingness to walk into the shadow together, even when it comes late, even when it comes through a door you did not know existed. We are still learning to do that, Frank and I. 37 years in, and we are still learning. I suppose that is what it means to stay.